This lecture is about the violence of borders, and it's drawing on this wonderful book by Reece Jones called Violent Borders. This topic seems especially uh, topical right now, if you'll pardon the pun. Um, Reece Jones has done a lot of work in this area, and I highly recommend his books. In 2025, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees estimated that 117 million people had been displaced by war, the largest number since World War II. This number includes internal displacement. So, for example, people in the Ukraine who have moved out of the Russian occupied zones into the Ukrainian zones, up to 67.8 million people, 42 million people who are classified as refugees, 8 million people classified as asylum seekers, and 4.4 million people classified as stateless, which is a particularly terrible way to be because you don't have a passport, no possibility of immigrating. In Since 2014, some 34,000 people have died attempting to cross the Mediterranean to get into Europe as illegal asylum seekers. Um, and just this year, and it's only just March, already 600 people have died. The EU's response to this death toll has been to militarize and attack the so-called traffickers and destroy their boats. Australia has done the same thing with regards to asylum seekers trying to come to this country from Indonesia. And this, of course, assumes and creates the illusion that traffickers are the cause of the problem rather than enablers. It ignores the conditions in the country that people want to leave and the immigration policies that restrict them. So Jones's argument is that the hardening of borders is the problem. It is the cause of violence at the border, not a response to it. And borders, he says, are a form of structural violence. So even when the violence isn't direct, although it routinely is, in the case of one person harming another, the presence of the wall as a barrier is a form of, if you like, passive violence because it forces people to cross seas in unsafe boats, to walk across deserts, and so on. Calling it structural violence, though, risks reducing blame and responsibility for causing harm. So we need to be careful how we use it. We don't want to make it seem as though the violence is just magically happening. Reece Jones argues that we can understand borders as enacting five different types of violence. There is, first of all, and I guess most obviously, the overt violence of border guards and security guards and so on. Secondly, there is the threat of force, walls, and other forms of barriers that force people to take more circuitous and more dangerous routes to get around them, so crossing deserts and seas. Three, limiting access and arresting people for not having proper papers and so on. And this, of course, is what in America ICE is doing on a major scale at the moment. Then there is denial of economic opportunity, keeping the poor out keeps them poor. And fifth, the environmental damage caused by security apparatuses. So, for example, borders inhabit collective international borders inhibit collective international environmental regulation. So where there is a border, there's almost no cooperation around how to protect the environment. The story of borders flies in the face of the press, the myth, if you like, of globalization, which we've been told for the last 30 or 40 years has been all about frictionless movement. But that, it turned out, was, if not a lie, then certainly a very partial truth. Money and to a lesser extent, goods can move freely these days, but not people. In the 1990s, following the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the raising of the so-called Iron Curtain in 1990, the EU opened its internal borders between all the countries that were part of the EU, but then via the Schengen Agreement, closed its external borders. And states who want to join the EU have to demonstrate their capacity to police their borders, particularly at airports and in their visa processes. And even within the EU now, border control is returning. In 2015, Austria, France, and Germany reinstated checkpoints at their internal borders. And who can forget the truckload of corpses found on a highway in Austria in 2015? Hungary built a razor wire fence on its border with Germany to try to stem the flow of Syrian refugees passing through their country. They also closed their main train station in Budapest. And perhaps the most heartbreaking image of all came from Turkey, was the body of 3-year-old Syrian boy Alan Kurdi washed up face down beach. So a key problem here is that not everyone who feels they have to migrate meets the UN criteria for a refugee, which, bear in mind, is a World War II concept. The definition excludes people who move because of either poverty or environmental change. These poor people are classified as economic migrants, as though their movement is voluntary. So refugee status obliges receiving countries to provide basic levels of care and to consider applications for asylum status. But it does not oblige them to accept refugees long term. So applications for residency can be denied, which means then that the applicant must return to their home country. For this reason, even people who have a legitimate asylum case, such as Syrians escaping war or Palestinians or probably now Iranians, they may still choose to opt to circumvent the refugee process and migrate informally, thus increasing their risk. And this risk is amplified by the fact that the EU countries, for example, don't want to encourage migration. So when refugee boats get into difficulty outside of territorial waters, they do nothing. In fact, they have a law that prohibits boats from making rescue attempts. Some EU spokespeople have even argued against having any rescue missions at all for refugees. The rationale is that it makes it more dangerous and that this will function as a deterrent. But as the Somali poet Warsan Shire put it, no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. EU security agency Frontex estimates that 1 in 4 people who attempt to cross the Mediterranean by boat die en route. The US-Mexico border is similarly dangerous, and it is one of the most policed borders in the world, and Trump promises to escalate that. Here it is the desert, not the sea, that poses the greatest threat to human life, and the toll has been every bit as great as it has been in Europe. The US has militarized and weaponized its border, and many migrants have been killed directly by security forces. Between 2010 and 2015, there were reported 33 people killed by security forces. The added peril of the Mexico-US border is, of course, the presence of cartels. They control the main smuggling routes, plus they legitimize the US view that all migrants are potentially or actually criminal. In 2011 alone, 11,000 would-be migrants were kidnapped by cartels. Between 2007 and 2013, it is estimated that 47,000 migrants died in Mexico, and more than 6,000 bodies have been recovered by the US Border Patrol since 1990 on or near its border. And all of this was a direct consequence of the policy to close easy routes and force people to take and to trek through inhospitable and remote areas. It has been estimated that for every body found, at least 2 other bodies are never found, covered by the shifting sand and so on. The India-Bangladesh border is regarded as being similarly deadly. There, more than 1,000 people have been directly killed by the security forces. And Australia's border is also quite deadly. It's guarded by large stretches of water, but this isn't enough to deter people. Most fly to Indonesia from elsewhere, such as Syria, and then attempt the crossing by boat. People try to get to Christmas Island, but that is problematic because it's no longer part of Australia for the purposes of asylum. So they really have to get to the mainland. The journey is hazardous. It is estimated that between the year 2000 and 2015, almost 2,000 people died en route. So migrants are captured at sea and then detained in offshore facilities in Nauru, Manus. And heartbreakingly, many Australians seem to support this policy. Uh, and the same is true in Europe and the US, where there's widespread support, even though there's protests for sure, but there is widespread support for the anti-immigration policies that restrict the possibility for people to seek asylum seeker in their country, which raises the question, which I'm not going to try to answer, of why people are so heartless that they would prefer to see asylum seekers drown in the Mediterranean rather than being given somewhere safe to live on land.